Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Todd Coons, and on this channel I do a whole bunch of things that relate to photography. And so if you're a photographer or you have any interest in photography, this is probably a place for you. Today I want to talk about travel photography and, one of the problems that occurs when you are traveling and trying to take beautiful pictures, you're only there for a short period of time. The lighting might not be ideal, the conditions might not be great, you might be there at the wrong time of day to take the perfect photograph. And I want to talk a little bit about what do you do when you're in a place that's unique to you. You're only, it might be a once in a lifetime chance to get there, but the conditions aren't ideal. What are you going to do to make the most out of a situation like that? Now, I want to back up and at least throw this out because this is sometimes true too. I don't know if you've run into, you're in the ideal location, the lighting is not too bad, but it's going to get a little bit better in the next 30 minutes or so, and you've got family saying, hey, take the picture, let's go, we got to get going. How many people have dealt with something like that, where you're traveling with people who don't know what it takes to get the perfect photograph, so your time is limited, and you're kind of restrained by what they want to do and the timeline they're trying to be on. So there's a whole lot of factors when it comes to travel photography that might make your job a little bit difficult because you don't have ideal conditions. You don't have the time to sit and wait for the sun to get in the right place, or maybe it's cloudy the day you're there. Maybe there's a whole bunch of people standing in your way, or or it's raining, or a lot of different things could be playing against you when it comes to travel photography and getting the best shot at the best location in the time that you're going to be there. Now, I recently took a trip with my family to Colorado, and we were up in Rocky Mountain National Park photographing the elk, and I knew I only had one morning to do it. So we got up at 4 a.m., got into the park by 5. We were there when the sun came up at 6:40, so we sat in our car for an hour and a half. But I had one morning to photograph the elk, and if it wasn't a perfect sunrise or it wasn't a perfect whatever, I was going to have to deal with what I was dealt that particular day. And as you can see, there was a lot of photographers doing the exact same thing that I was doing. The elk were out, they were right there next to us. It was perfect in that regard, but the lighting was really flat. It was a pretty sunrise, but it wasn't phenomenal. I've seen where the sun will just come shining through the meadow and backlight everything and just be gorgeous, but this particular day, that wasn't the case. We had to deal with what we were dealt and get the best photographs I could. Now, another thing that I want to point out is in this particular case, I did not want to carry a lot of photographic gear on this trip. I was shooting a wedding in this same trip, and I had enough gear as it was. I didn't have a long telephoto lens. What I had was a 16-80 on my Fuji X-T4. That was the longest lens I had. So I was, somewhat limited to the equipment that I had brought. Plus I was limited to the lighting conditions and the situation that I had. But I took a lot of photographs trying to get as many elk shots as I could get under the conditions that I had. And I got some neat ones. I mean, I was right there, me and 700 other photographers, but I got some neat photographs. The lighting wasn't ideal, but I got some neat photographs. Now, I've got my notes here to kind of tell you what I'm going to go through as far as a progression to make this image what it ends up being. But straight out of the camera, I was at 2/50th of a second, f4, 80 millimeters, ISO 800. Higher ISO than I would probably normally like to shoot at, but the sun really hadn't come up and I needed to be at a higher shutter speed for sure. I'd rather have a little bit of noise with a higher ISO than have any motion blur or anything like that. So I know there's a great deal of debate sometimes when it comes to processing our photographs, how much manipulation is too much. Now we got the whole world of AI. How much AI is too much? But I want to walk through kind of what I did, the progression of what I did to get this photograph from straight out of my camera to what I would call a pretty decent final image. And, give me your comments and tell me what you think, if I should have gone farther, if I should have done different things. But here's where I took this image. First of all, I took it into Lightroom, which is the first place I normally go to process an image. And the first thing I did was take out some noise. Now at 800 ISO with my Fuji, the noise was not horrendous, but there was a little bit of noise there. So I cleared up a little bit of the noise. The second thing I did was I ran a Vivid preset, and I believe the Vivid preset is part of Lightroom. You probably all have it. If you have Lightroom, it's probably in there. What that preset does, it just kind of gives a little bit of punch. The colors get a little more vivid. In this case, it wasn't vastly noticeable, but it got a little more punch to it. Next, I changed the color, gave it some warmth. Next, I added a vignette. I wanted the edges to get a little darker, which would draw your eye into the elk, because the flat lighting, he didn't really jump off the page like I would have liked him to. Next, I darkened the sky a little bit, which I'll come back to the sky here in a minute. And then I did some retouching. I removed some weeds and some distracting elements that were in there, including some telephone poles and some telephone lines that are on the hill in the back, which are kind of hard to see at first, but they're certainly there, and so I took those out. Now at this point, exporting it from Lightroom, it's still just okay. It's a nice photograph, but there's nothing really special or amazing about it. Mostly, I think, because the lighting is just flat. It's just kind of blah. And lighting is the key. If you guys want to be a great photograph compared to an okay photograph, typically it's the lighting that's going to change it. So at this point, I brought it into Photoshop and started working some magic there. So here's the image after my basic retouching in Lightroom, getting all the kind of the color and the vignette and some basic things correct. And then what I did was I brought it into Lightroom, and the first thing I did was an overlay fill of 50% gray. And let me change this blending mode. I'll show you what I do. If I put this layer on normal, what I do is I fill it with 18% gray, and then I can burn and dodge on the layer as I see fit. But you change the blending mode from normal to overlay, and what it ends up doing, if you don't have any burning and dodging on it at all, you wouldn't see a difference. The image would look the same. But this way I'm able to darken the darker areas and dodge the lighter areas and give it some punch and some dimension. If you look in these trees, that's a really great place to see the difference. I mean, they just, that day was so flat as in terms of the lighting, there was not a great deal of dimension to it. So this burning and dodging technique gives it some depth, some dimension, some light direction, if you will. So from there, I gave some color. This was fairly subtle, but if you look in the trees once again, you can see some warm tones to it. And then I just did a overall orange gradient from the top, just to give the whole thing a little bit more warmth and some direction in the lighting. So once I got through with all my Photoshop work, it's one of those projects, and I've said this on this channel many times, I had to walk away from it. Sometimes you can sit and stare at an image too long, and it just takes walking away from it, coming back to it again later with some fresh set of eyes and seeing what it needs. Because I knew, even though it was really close, it was missing something. A wise man once told me, it's 90% there. You need to figure out the other 10%. So I knew I needed that last little 10% to kind of push it over. So I walked away, got away from it for a little bit, came back to it with fresh eyes. In the meantime, I showed it to several people, kind of got their input on it. And what I determined, and I got different comments on this, but I think what it needed was to crop the sky out. Typically, your eye tends to look at the brightest part of a photograph, and in this case, I think it was the sky. And that was taking me away from looking at the elk. So what I ended up doing was just cropping out the sky. The hill in the background was a little bright along the edge of where I cropped, so I burnt that down a little bit, just darkened it a little bit so that the edges would be a little darker. Again, bringing the attention and your eye to the elk. And I think I like it. I like the way it is. It's kind of an odd panoramic type shape, but I like the dimensions. It works for me. So based on where I started with some not so ideal conditions, the one day I happened to be there to where it ended up in the end, I think I came up with a pretty good image. But I'm very interested to hear what you guys think. What would you have done different? What do you do on your travel photography or those images that you produce that you just happen to have that particular day that didn't give you the ideal conditions? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Let me know what you think of this image. And yeah, thanks for watching as always. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video at all. I would appreciate that. And if you haven't subscribed, think about subscribing. I appreciate all of you who do that. And again, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next video.